So in the previous recording, I left you with this question, why some policies are adopted while others are not adopted. And I think, as I said, the inability to find a definite answer to this question in itself is another limitation of the rational model. And that takes us to the next model, which is the critical model. So the critical model is just almost the opposite of the rational model. Where the dominant influence on policy is the objective analysis of available information by the policy expert. So in the critical model in particular, or in contrast, we understand policies as being mainly determined by political contestation between different groups and competing interests. So this means in particular that recognizing that, it's kind of really recognizing that policy making is inherently political process, and that we cannot separate the activity of making policies or policy practice from the political context and even the social, and even cultural context in which these policies are made. So that's why some policies are just adopted and others aren't adopted. So it's, again, as I said in lectures 1, it is a politicized context. Even the fact of choosing which policy option is better than the other, that in itself is a politicized process. So the critical model departs really from the assumption that policy is neutral or objective or purely technical process. So instead, it tries to argue that policy making should focus on power relations, social justice related issues, and the ways dominant interests shape policy problems, solutions, and even whom the beneficiaries or policy recipients are. The argument also in the critical model is that policy analysis must reveal and challenge the power structures and ideologies underpinning policy decisions, instead of just assuming it is an objective reality or an objective way of doing things. So this again goes beyond interpretation by seeking to really emancipate marginalized groups. And as you will hear more as you start developing your knowledge in critical theory is mostly about power issues and power relations and how power gets to marginalize certain groups and allocate privileges to the others. So this is a very important aspect to, a critical model of doing things. So power and contestations in the critical model are very central. We cannot depart from the power and the political contestations, which in themselves are inherent to policy practice. So then the question is, are power and political contestations even evil as we might be tempted to think? So the answer, and the quickest one, is really that no, power and contestations aren't in themselves expected to be evil in liberal democracies like, our own democracy. Michel Foucault, one of the key scholars you might want to read about, views power as something relational, something diffuse, and something which is embedded in societal structures. And this in itself makes power and contestation not only possible, but even inevitable when it comes to policy making. So power and contestations might become problematic, though, when particular groups and ideas in society come to dominate to the point that there does not appear to be an alternative to other voices, especially the marginalized voices. So when the voices of privately funded professional lobbies limits voices of ordinary citizens, this in itself politically becomes a problem, and that's where we end up in practices which might be similar to, either colonialism or even dictatorship. And, that's what we want to avoid as much as we can in policy making. But also we have to acknowledge that power and contestation in the Australian context in particular have been problematic over the last few decades. And there are many reasons to this, really. Part of it is the legacy of colonialism and, racism, which is still with us. But even capitalism and big markets and, big business kind of lobbying and trying to dominate the voice and the discourses when it comes to making policy. So the key question now might be, what else can we do to improve policy practice in the Australian context? So this in itself will take us to the limitations of the critical model. It has certainly its own limitations as well, and we might want to think more about those. But let's briefly talk about the interpretive model, which again might be an alternative to the limitations of the previous two models. This model just really pays attention to how objects of the social world are constructed in multiple ways for various purposes. So what are seen as matters for policy attention reflect the way in which participants make sense of the world. So what knowledge is seen as valid or relevant, and who can command attention to that knowledge. So you'll see the word knowledge, power, and discourse coming very often, or being the central focus in the next few recordings. But let's say that the interpretive model views policy practice as fundamentally social, communicative process, and that policy problems and even solutions are constructed through meanings and language. And these are not just like, we don't just reach policy alternatives at random. We construct them. They are social construction. And this is what the interpretive model is really kind of putting forward, that problems, they come from somewhere, but solutions, policies as solutions to the problems are socially constructed. And the way we construct those are through meanings, through language, through shared understandings, and through what Michel Foucault again called discourse. So objective facts, you can see this is clearly at odds with the previous two model, especially the first one, the rational model. So objective facts are seen as impossible through this model. And of course, we always need to dig deep through discourse analysis to get to understand what best options are there, rather than thinking there could be just one objective. And you can see even the illustration of on the picture. Is it a rabbit? Is it a duck? So definitely the interpretive model encourages this kind of thinking and deep thinking to be able to reach policy solutions. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next recording.